Maggie, there was a article recently released by a chunk of the United Methodist Church about the decline of our denomination. Like, churches across the globe are declining, but the mainline denomination is certainly declining at one of the fastest rates. I've seen like several stats that it's gone from one of the biggest to now one of the smallest groupings. But I'm originally from Oregon, and the Pacific Northwest put out a stat in an article called Smaller, Sent, but Still Here. And it was interesting because it was kind of talking about where they were in 2016. And I'll give you the stats here. They had what they called a corporate size church. They had 25 program size churches, 102 pastoral size churches, and 108 family size churches. That was in 2016. Now in 2025, they have 11 program size churches, 57 pastoral size churches, and 119 family size churches. So they got rid of corporate churches, and everything kind of shrunk somewhere in like the 46% range, depending on which stat you're looking at. So I was like looking at this, and it was interesting for me because like I work in the church world, and church growth is something that's often talked about. But for like the average attender, I'm interested to know like what you think about small churches versus big churches versus mega churches. Even this language of corporate, program, pastoral, and family, which I was saying before we started recording, feels a little bit like moving the goalposts. Like even the language around this, I think, is like projecting values. Calling something a corporate sized church, I think, is trying to be pretty negative. But yeah, I'd be interested. Like, I live in this world, and sometimes I get blinders to just like the corporate conversation of it. And so I'd be interested to know, like, what are your thoughts on a fruitful or healthy church? Because that's kind of the main thrust of this article that was written, was trying to say we're still fruitful, even though we're not numerically large. And so what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I have like complicated feelings about church size, I think. I know I'm not alone in having attended mega churches in the past that have some problems with like abuse of power, and that I feel like that's just really hard to get away from. Like any big group or corporation, which like ultimately a church, especially when it gets to be that size, where it's like several thousand congregants, a big staff, people are salaried, like it does run a lot more like a business. And it has this really weird, like sticky, like, oh, but it's a church, so it's very spiritual, very emotional, very relational, but then also the corporate business side of things. I have a lot of complicated feelings, parentheses negative, around church size. And this conversation makes me think of, and now I'm going to totally like misremember and butcher it, but it's just like a funny memory I have with my husband. We stayed in this Airbnb in, I think, Springfield, Missouri. And it was this really cool, like little kind of, the staging of it was like kind of small and historical, and there were all of these vintage books. And so we were just kind of like leafing through the books. And one of them was this old book from almost like the turn of the 20th century. Like it was well over 100 years old. And it was, the author was, I can't remember what the overall book was about, but the author wrote like a scathing indictment of the number of churches that we often see, especially in like Midwestern America, where you'll drive down one road in a town that is not that big and see like 15 churches, and they're all really small. And basically the point of that the author was trying to make was that like people will split churches over basically nothing, and that like the size of a community has to be big enough to justify having multiple churches. Otherwise, it's like ridiculous to have that many, and the size of a small community cannot support the number of churches that we currently have. And it makes churches like kind of ineffectual. So I thought that was I agree with that point. I think it's kind of crazy how just the sheer number of churches that are around. And it was weird that, like, because this is a topic of interest for me and my husband, just having, grown up in church and now having complicated feelings and deconstructed and that kind of thing. It was funny to just like kind of pick up a random book at a random Airbnb and find this essay on one of our like passion topics. It was kind of weird. So, but yeah, I don't know. I think I also want to say, like, I have been in church for a really long time, but mostly as a congregant, like not as a person that's really on staff and running things. So I feel like I have some blind spots as to what it actually takes to run a church. So I'd be interested to hear from you, from your perspective too, how that article that you read kind of sits with you and what your feelings are on it.
Yeah, it is interesting to me because it's, to your point, like churches I do feel like split and split and split and split and over like some of the smallest, silliest things. Where we talked about this, we do a Thursday night class at the Well called The Drip, and we talked about denominational splits and movement and all that kind of stuff. And just kind of interesting because it's like many of the splits are over some of the most non-consequential things. And then you make that into much more modern sense. I mean, it could be like the color of the carpet is why some churches split, not even like theological. And so, so that's interesting to me. And I'd be interested to read that book that was in the Airbnb to see what they said. But this specific article was just interesting to me because I'm kind of watching the church out on the Northwest, which I think is like the frontier of what the church could be in terms of like a post-evangelical world, a church that's inclusive but still loves Jesus. Like everything that I think the Well is trying to do of deconstruction and reconstruction and reframing, I think could be so needed and, for lack of a better term, really successful out on the West. But nothing is really sticking. And I have my own thoughts on that, like personally, what I think the reasons are, and we can talk about that, but, and not everyone would agree with me, but I certainly have my thoughts of why that is. But it's interesting because it feels a little bit like the goalposts are moving on like what success means. And it feels very corporate in the language, which I don't appreciate, but then it feels like it's trying to like throw corporate language under the bus by using it. And so it's interesting. I use so they're the domains of, what did I say? Corporate, program, pastoral, and family sized. What would you, like, if you were guessing, like how big would you say a corporate sized church is? Like, what would you say a corporate sized church is?
Is it like, and it's measured by like attendees or members?
I think they're counting attendance.
Okay. So I would, in my mind, that's anything over like 1,000. Is that close or too?
Well, let's go through them all real quick.
Okay. I wouldn't know. Okay.
What would you think? So 1,000 is corporate. What would you say a program? So that would be their second biggest, would be a program size church.
Probably like 500.
Okay. And then there's
1,500.
And then pastoral is the next. Yeah.
250. I'm just gonna like keep going down 250 and then like 100.
And everything else under that is like a family size. And so you would say the Well is like pastoral size, or no, so family size.
It's like it's in between, family and pastoral size.
Yeah. So in this rubric, we would be a program size church. So it would be their second biggest. So their frame of reference goes 350 and bigger is corporate, 151 to 350 is program, 150 or 51 to 150 is pastoral, and anything under 50 is family. And so that's maybe part of like what my issue is it's like, I think we all agree that like a 10,000 person mega church can be a problem. But like gathering a couple hundred people doesn't seem like you've like tipped the, but I mean, certainly any church could do this, but it does seem to me like there's a lack of effectiveness in telling a story worth hearing, and they're trying to move the goalposts and blame everyone else. And this is like me being negative to my own people. But that's like my own feelings as I read this.
Yeah, that I'm really surprised by those like categories and I think that the general sense I get from talking to other people too is that like when we think megachurch, we think thousands of people, if not tens of thousands. And I have gone to, and these were in different denominations. So I don't know, they may have different like metrics and measurements or whatever, but I've gone to two mega churches like that people in the community largely agree. They have giant facilities, like multi-building campuses, lots of money, and thousands of people that attend. And both of them have kind of really tried to shirk that megachurch label. At one point, a pastor even said, it's not like it's more helpful to think of it less of a big church and more like a small town, which is kind of crazy.
That is crazy.
And so, but it was very like, I don't know, it just, and conversations I would have with staff about budgeting for it, because when I was an intern and setting up, helping to plan and put on events and stuff, conversations around money were very like, it was giving people that would say like, oh, my parents we're not rich, we're comfortable. Like that was the vibe of like really trying to distance themselves from wealth and from power and influence, which I always thought was really disingenuous and kind of like put a bad taste in my mouth. So, and now especially hearing like what is considered a corporate size church is anything above 350. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Well, again, this is also just for the Pacific Northwest region of the United Methodist Church. So this would not be like universal language, but for them, that's what they said it was. Yeah.
But I think that highlights something like it makes this conversation really hard to have because you keep saying kind of like the goalposts are moving, but there's no standard definition. Like we don't have like agreed upon terms for what is a mega church, what makes a church corporate, what makes a church big, influential, et cetera, because it differs by region, denomination, all of that stuff.
So that makes me want to ask the better question, which is why I want to do this all in general, because I'm less interested in talking about the size of churches, but what makes, in your opinion, a healthy church? Like, because I think that's like the more profound question. And like, I think we might both agree that a healthy church is not a small town or whatever, like, or its own ecosystem. But it's also not like, and maybe, actually, I won't say it's not that, but I would say it maybe isn't also like a compound of like 12 people in the middle of nowhere. And so it certainly doesn't have to be like tens of thousands of people, but it also doesn't have to be like a commune in the middle of the wilderness. And so for you, and I think I really want to know your opinion, because it's like I certainly have skin in the game. And so I think my voice in this space is less maybe trustworthy because it's more biased on like being a pastor. And so I would just be interested from you to know, like, what are the markers when you walk in of a healthy faith community? And then if you have any insight on it, like what you think what impact those markers would have on numbers. Like, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And this is a really complicated question. And also I'm not coming into this like bias free. Like I certainly have a bias against mega churches because I've had bad experiences at them. And when I see videos, I feel like every Christmas there will be a reel or TikTok that goes viral of like camels and zebras walking down the aisles of like some Dallas megachurch or something. I don't know. And I'm just like
ziplining in.
Yeah, and I'm just like, okay, like I don't know. That's icky and gross. So in the interest of disclosure, I'm also not unbiased in this conversation.
Fair enough.
I will say though, because I definitely know that there are small churches, like size isn't the only thing here. There are small churches that are toxic and small churches that hurt people. And so I feel like there has to be, I think that it really boils down to leadership and the quality of leadership, because if you have a group of people that's being led by either one pastor or a pastoral team that shows strong leadership skills, and by that I mean like is humble, shows humility, but also shows, decisiveness and a willingness to try new things to benefit the good of the group.
Yeah.
Then if it's 10 people or 1,000 people, that church is probably going to be a pretty healthy environment. And there are safeguards that you can put in place when churches get bigger, having like third-party HR teams or something like that, where people who have, so that way if there are issues or abuse of power on staff, congregants, volunteers, other people at the church have somewhere to go that is kind of removed and unbiased. So I think it has more to do with like leadership and leadership structure than it does with size.
Yeah, I think that's astute. Like I've seen churches of 15 people that are hyper unhealthy because all they care about is keeping the church alive so they can be buried in the cemetery, and then I've seen churches of 10,000 that are really unhealthy for all the reasons we know. And what's interesting is like, and I think about this all the time, like which one is more unhealthy or which one is more visible and which one is more prominent. Like obviously we know about the 10,000 plus person churches because their influence is larger, at least on a communications level. But you said this earlier about like the idea of like driving through Springfield and there's 1,000 little churches. It's like there might actually be a lot more small unhealthy churches than there are large unhealthy churches. Like I don't know that to be true. That's a little bit of speculation, but it's like just to your point, like there is far more than like the attendance numbers that predicate health. And I think oftentimes in this conversation, especially in the deconstruction space, with our good friends on the other podcast that we by our name, like I was looking at a lot of their stuff is around like church size and less around like the heart, so to speak. It's like, or it like just conflates size with negativity. And I do think that's sometimes like an unfair critique of mega churches by those deconstructing, but it's also like not unfair because maybe they need to be held to a higher standard, So I don't know. It's just an interesting conversation. And but you walked into the well, like our side. I mean, you walked into, I think we were at 2 services at that point, but we'll say there was like 50 to 70 people in the room when you walked in. Like, was that, and I think maybe I've asked this before, but as a reminder, like, was that like off-putting to you or like encouraging to be like, there's enough people to have critical mass, but like you weren't like just a number in the crowd? Like, what did that, like, was that a good signal or a weird one walking into a church?
So I will say in my experience, I haven't been to a bunch of mid-sized churches. I personally have gone to either like literal mega churches or church plants that are like less than 100 people. Like I have kind of like the opposite ends.
Interesting.
And going to the well, because I think I said on here too that I like cyber stalked you guys for like a year before actually attending. So I had a pretty good idea. I wasn't going in blind. I kind of knew that I got the vibe of the size of it. And yeah, going in, you definitely cannot hide. Like I was a new person that showed up and people noticed me and noticed that I was new. And I think you and JT, I know I spoke to JT personally, like individually that day. And he made sure I had like people to sit with and, was really welcoming in a lot of, and so that's great because that does not happen at bigger churches just because there are so many people on any given Sunday. You could have several dozen, if not more, brand new attendees. And even if you have a really big volunteer welcome team, hospitality team, there are going to be some people that don't get seen.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants to be approached always too.
Yeah.
That's like the other piece of it. So my personality and my experience with church, I felt very welcomed and was like, this is great. But yeah, I could see if someone is coming in a little bit more skittish or is a little more introverted, being kind of like, oh no, like the spotlight is on me. Like everybody knows I'm the new kid and it's terrifying. So, but that's just, that's just personal temperament. I think that that's just going to happen.
Do you know who John Mark Cromer is?
The artist? Like the musical artist?
I think he's a pastor. He's written some books. He's a pastor of a church in Portland called Bridgetown. He wrote The Ruthless and Elimination of Hurry and a few other like books.
Yes. Who am I thinking of? I'm thinking of the guy that did no. I'm thinking of the guy that did Mercury and Lightning is the only album that's coming to mind, and it's not even his most popular album.
Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yeah, that's it. the famed Christian artist
Yeah.
Lin-Manuel.
So this guy, I just saw a clip of him this morning. He, again, like kind of hipster mega church pastor, but he's like kind of pulled out of being the lead pastor, founding pastor, and is kind of like in this trying to grow the church in like a smaller kind of way. But he said this thing today that he was saying that he thinks the reason that the Catholic Church is growing is because it's quieter. It's growing among like ex-evangelicals and deconstructed kids because it's quiet. And I was struck by that because I'm like, for a deconstructor, like what is compelling to someone when they're looking for a church? And I'm not saying the Catholic Church isn't compelling. That's not the case I'm trying to make. But is it like quiet? Is it small? Is it loud? Is it the teaching? Is it the community? Like, that's a question I ask myself a lot of, like, if you are a deconstructing person looking for a community, like what would be, is it the noise? Is it the teaching? Is it the tradition? Like what is it? And only you can only speak for you, but I just wonder like what you think about that.
I think, and I experienced this a little bit personally, and I also sense this in a lot of other deconstruction or like deconstructed and now non-religious spaces, groups, conversations. There is a lot of you. On one of our first episodes together, you were like, I am a straight white male pastor. I am like the effigy of everyone that's ever hurt you. Why do you hang out with me? Basically, I'm, paraphrasing. But I think that like it's that, but the vibe of an evangelical church. So walking into a new church as a deconstructing Christian, a deconstructing evangelical, and hearing Hillsong during worship, seeing a pastor that is straight and white and in their 30s and is, and is a guy, hearing some of the like Christianese, Christian terminology, that can be a reminder of something that was very hurtful. And as someone who's trying to leave that space and heal from hurt that has been done in those spaces, you have to be like, it's kind of like if it like walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, kind of a vibe. Yeah. So I think that some people who are deconstructing look for something totally different. So it makes sense to me that like high liturgy or very liturgical, like kind of high church denominations like the Episcopal Church or the Catholic Church are gaining popularity because it looks so different from modern evangelical spaces that people come from.
Yeah, it is interesting to me. And I think that's the walk like a duck, quack like a duck is very interesting because that would be like maybe really compelling to some people. Or like you said, just a massive turnoff. Like I think about this almost weekly, that the things I say without thinking about it that inadvertently like trigger someone, which is certainly an overused phrase, but I think about the idea of like that I'm going to pull someone out of a moment unintentionally just by like my vernacular. And this is not exactly the same situation, but maybe I mentioned this. Like we have a new couple at the church that came up to me after the Sunday after Easter and like thanked me for my message. And the reason they thanked me was that it was like I was really descriptive and I didn't make any assumptions that people knew the story, which is something I always do on Easter because I know we have a lot of new people. And they were like, I just want you to know we've been coming for like a month. And that was like super helpful because we've like never opened our Bibles and don't know any of these stories.
Yeah.
And like they tolerated like weeks of feeling like the outsider. And then like finally like being like, oh, like they're like speaking to me was I think the sticking point. And it was a reminder to me that it's like oftentimes the church defaults to insider language in terms of what it communicates, but it also is trying to communicate that it's for people that aren't there, but its actions don't necessarily communicate that. And like that was just an interesting like reminder. And when you said the thing about like wanting something completely different, that could be the other side too, is like going to somewhere that feels so different that like you don't feel like the outsider because it's all new to you. But then when you walk into a space that feels kind of familiar, and then there's some things like, you know, like it's just it's not certainly one size fits all, but it is interesting to think about.
Yes. And I think you have a tough job in that you have to kind of try and meet everybody where they are. And
we certainly have a diverse congregation.
Yes. And have you heard the term online, the like bean soup thing? Where
No.
Okay, so basically it's like the idea that if a person is like creating recipes or like food content online, they'll like put out a video that's a recipe for bean soup. And then the comments will be filled with people that are like, well, I don't like beans, so what can I use instead? Or like, I'm allergic to beans. This is so triggering to me. Like that kind of like, or like beans are a really important part of my culture. Like, how dare you suggest a substitute for beans? Like, it's this energy that has, I don't think it was like born online. Like, I think people have always been like this, but having access to being able to voice your opinion on everything all the time and having so much control over customization and having things be catered specifically to us does kind of make, I think, a more immature individual think that everything should be catered to them. And there is a certain level of maturity that you have to realize that like not everything is for you. So if you don't like beans, don't make bean soup. Like if you see the recipe for it, keep scrolling. Like you don't have to, you know. And so that I keep thinking throughout this conversation, we like cannot cater to every single individual and all of their needs. Like you certainly can't as a pastor. And I think that churches aren't meant to do that. Like they aren't meant to fill every single gap. But I do think that even within a very large church, you can have individual pockets of community that do that better. So like we were talking recently at our like leadership meeting about how to like where a challenge should come from or where like a push towards action should come from. And it's my thought that if it comes from the pulpit, it's gonna land wrong pretty much every time. But if it comes from community, if it comes from friends and individuals who say like, I see this strength in you, I see this talent, this potential in you, and I think that you should push yourself here, that is so much more meaningful than a pastor being like, come on, guys, we got to rally the troops for the Lord, like that, because that is going to hit everybody different and it's going to hit a lot of people wrong. So I just think about that, like, it's tough. Like, not everything is going to land perfectly for everyone.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that people, especially in the deconstruction space, are hurting, and sometimes a person needs to heal before they're receptive to really any kind of challenge. And I'm saying that as a person who has been there and has been in this space where it's like, no one could tell me anything about the church, or there was no redeemable quality for,
Yeah. It is interesting. It's like, I think about this a lot, like, and I've mentioned this on the podcast in previous iterations. Like, I'm always like, to your point, you can't be everything to everyone. Like, I'm either too progressive for Christians or too Christian for progressives. And I remember, like, I got into a argument one time with it was a post about queer inclusion in the church, and I was getting like roasted by evangelicals for being inclusive, and then I was getting roasted by gay people for being Christian, and I'm like, I don't know what to do here. And it's like, what am I doing here? But you did say something that I had a question that maybe can be like our final question. Is you in passing was like, the church can't be for just like you and your needs, essentially. Like, the church isn't here to like cater to you, I think was your exact words. So what is Maggie's thought on the purpose of the church in the world? And I think this does full circle with this, like, there are these different goalposts of size, and certainly size, I think we agree, doesn't predicate effectiveness and isn't the goal of just like amassing people, or it's not like a goal to be selective, maybe, though you might, maybe it is, I don't know. So what, from your perspective, what is the purpose of the church? And I really do want you to be honest. Don't try to say what you think you're supposed to say. What do you think?
I don't know, because
maybe that's the best answer.
Yeah, well, and because in trying to answer this question, I cannot help but think of history and think of all the harm that the church has done, and how we, as the Protestant church and the like Catholic church, like the Christian church as a whole, has been responsible for a lot of injustice and a lot of wrongdoing, but has also done a lot of good. And I feel like I get stuck in, so like thinking about moving forward and trying to justify or name a purpose for the church's existence, I get stuck in the like weighing the good versus the bad. And I don't think that that's helpful. So like, I don't know. But I know that a lot of people get a lot out of it. And I think probably ultimately here's what I use church for, if it helps.
Yeah, that's a helpful way to frame it. I appreciate that.
I use church for spiritual development and like cultivation, so that I can have kind of a place to go and focus on spirituality and how that impacts my life as an individual. And I also use it for community. And so I can go and meet people who I like and are cool, and I can hang out with them and be friends. So that, and then there's lots of things that are kind of born out of that, right? So there is like this kind of missional, community focused mindset of, I do want to make the world a better place, specifically this region of, Eastern Missouri that I'm currently in, because that's about all the influence I've got. And so a short answer is, I don't know. Long answer is community and spiritual development.
Take the well out of this, because this answer won't offend me. But do you think, or add the well too, I don't really care. But do you think the church as a whole, capital C church, over the history of time, has been a greater good or negative, like a net positive or negative for human existence? I want Maggie's take on this.
No,
and this will be clip for social media.
Great. Yeah, perfect. Tag my personal account, my personal email. I almost, part of me wants to like refuse to answer this question. Just because I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's been a net good or a net evil. I think like it really depends on who you ask, because if you ask the, some of the indigenous populations that were imperialized by European countries trying to spread Christianity to the unreached, or heavy air quotes, or unsaved or whatever, then yeah, it's probably been a net evil. But if you look at the role that the church has had in charity, and especially things like building hospitals and making healthcare and medicine accessible to people, or I think about one of my favorite shows is called The Midwife, which is a fiction show, but it is about like a group of nuns that live to deliver babies in England. And like there are pockets of church action that exist to do good things. But yeah, I don't know. And then I think about the Inquisition and I'm like, God, I'm back to, square one again. So it's just like, it's really, really hard because there are big, big visible wrongs that the church is responsible for. But there are also a lot of like smaller, maybe harder to see good that the church has done. And I don't think that I, as an individual, can fairly weigh those things. So,
what great humility and honesty. I would say, as someone that lacked humility, I'll give my take. I'm interested because it's like I was thinking about, and this I do think is full circle to where we've been. Like a lot of the negative is based in this conversation that we began with around numbers and size of the church. And so you look at like the Inquisition, and you look at the Crusades, and you look at the kind of colonization of different continents and countries by European or Western evangelicals. Like all of that is like based in a numbers game. But then you do these things like what the nuns are doing in this show you're talking about, which is like based on real things that people did. And there's many places where like the church during the world wars was ran by women because many of the men were like out, and like certainly conscientious objectors were. But so it is interesting. It's like the things that are based in like numbers generally have had net negative gains, like in the idea of like making Jesus famous or making heaven crowded or any of the language that we use today, which I'm like, I do want everyone to know who Jesus is. But generally when there's this like hyper evangelical invitational motivation based in like an imperialistic mechanism, which is how kind of like evangelism in the church has been going for the last 50 years, especially, but hundreds of years as well, then I think it's going to be a negative. But then you look at like the social impact, which is a lot of what the book of James talks about, which is currently like one of my favorite books in the Bible, like one that I'm diving into more than I have in many other seasons of my life. It's like a lot about actionable outpourings of this faith that you claim to have. And James's critique of people that like claim it, but then don't do anything to make the world better other than like talk about their faith or try to add numbers to it. And he would be like, well, like do something about it, like make the world have more peace, or more food, or more clothes, or whatever. Where I think the church for a long time has been like, yeah, those things are cool, but what if we had like 2 million people in our church? So it's just an interesting way to look at it. And I think you're right, though. It's messy and hard to say like fully net positive or negative. But I think if you broke it down into like the motivation, you can almost always see what motivation leads to a negative and what motivation leads to a positive.
That's true. Well, and we've been as a church, we've been talking about Reconstruction and kind of the four, like Brian McLaren's 4 stages of faith deconstruction and Reconstruction. And what you just said reminded me of that, like trying to boil down the church's impact to a net positive or a net negative is really a really simplistic way to look at it. Like, that's just like not how the world works, especially for something with a history as long and as complicated as the church, the worldwide church.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's interesting. And this series has been interesting to me because in the frameworks of simplicity, complexity, perplexity, and harmony have been kind of helpful to just look at not just like the church, but my beliefs and the doctrines I hold and everything. It's kind of proven to be a pretty helpful rubric, and one that maybe we explore at some point in more length, like actually look at the book, because I do think it's a helpful book for those in deconstruction and reconstruction. Maybe we can dive into it a little more in an episode down the road.
Yeah, I will say that author, Brian McLaren, guested on the Bible for Normal People years ago, which I love that podcast, and it really helped me through, especially like the initial stages of my deconstruction. And I heard that episode and I've listened to it. I almost never like re-listen to podcast episodes. I feel like that's not a thing that people do. Like, you don't repeatedly listen to one. I've listened to that one probably 4 times just because like it was those stages for me were so helpful in navigating Reconstruction and deconstruction. So yeah, I would love to read the whole book and chat about it because it was really helpful for me, and I feel like it's probably helpful for other people too.
Yeah. To help you feel less alone, I do have 2 episodes that I like comfort listen to. The Liturgist podcast. They have one on the Enneagram, which has always been like a favorite of mine, and they do really, really well. But then they have one that was like early on in their stages of LGBTQ inclusion. Like, I think they were maybe already there fully, but they were still trying to walk the line of knowing they had a pretty evangelical crowd, but they were still in this like deconstruction space. And I think it's like those episodes, that whole podcast as a whole was like produced in the conversations were like just really amazing. But those 2 episodes in particular are ones that I probably listened to like at least 10 times each, which is crazy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. Well, good. That does make me feel better. Because I think that episode and like maybe one other Bible for Normal People are the only podcast episodes I've ever listened to multiple times.
Well, for anyone listening, if there's an episode of the Deconstruction Zone you listen to multiple times, let us know.
Comment every time you listen to it. I'm just kidding.
Well, Maggie, what do you got for us just before we send ourselves out? You got any words of wisdom?
I think when thinking about the 4 phases of deconstruction / reconstruction and church building / growth, etc., my final thought would just be like, it's not that simple, guys. It's really not that simple. And some things in life are simple, for sure. A lot aren't. And I think when we talk about the worldwide church or the American church as a whole, pretty much nothing about it is simple.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And thank you. You gave me the podcast episode. I just wrote it down. I said, Maggie thinks it's not that simple.
It's true. It's true. I don't think that really anything. I talked about my job last week. I don't think any aspect of what I do day to day is very simple. So
yeah, sometimes I wish it was, which that's like another episode. So I don't want to open up something, but I just wish life was simple sometimes. Like,
it's your turn to bring up a new podcast topic at the 45-minute mark.
Yeah. I won't do that, but I would like life to be more simple sometimes.
Fair.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was fun. Thanks for anyone listening. I'm hanging out in a coffee shop, so hopefully it wasn't too jarring for you guys. Could you hear the music in the background as I was talking?
I could hear Heart of Glass a little bit, but I didn't want to interrupt you. So
I tried to mute myself, but I was also like, maybe our listeners were jamming on it. So if you enjoyed it, let us know.
I mean, Heart of Glass is a great song, so
it's not a bad one. So all right, Maggie, this was fun. I'll see you around.
All right, see ya.